A fabric-covered biplane with a maximum speed of 138 miles per hour crippled the Bismarck. Let that sink in for a moment. While Germany's most powerful battleship, 50,000 tons of steel, armor, and firepower, was attempting to escape into the Atlantic, it was a lumbering aircraft that looked like it belonged in a World War I museum that delivered the killing blow. The Fairey Swordfish was obsolete before it even entered service in 1936. Open cockpits exposed crews to freezing winds. Fixed landing gear created drag. Fabric covering meant the airframe was literally held together by cloth and dope. Its top speed was slower than most fighter aircraft could dive. By every measure of modern aviation progress, the Swordfish should have been retired before World War II even started. Yet this ancient biplane sank more Axis tonnage than any other Allied aircraft during the war. It crippled half of Italy's battleship fleet in a single night at Taranto. It hunted U-boats across the Atlantic. It disabled the Bismarck's rudder, dooming Germany's most feared warship. And it did all of this while looking like something held together with string and prayers, which is exactly what its crews affectionately called it, the string bag. How does an obsolete biplane accomplish what modern aircraft couldn't? The answer reveals something fundamental about warfare. Effectiveness isn't always about cutting-edge technology. Sometimes it's about reliability, adaptability, and the skill of the people using the weapon. The Swordfish proved that an aircraft considered hopelessly outdated could achieve results that no amount of speed or advanced design could guarantee. This is the story of the Fairey Swordfish, an aircraft that defied every expectation, outlasted its own replacement, and proved that sometimes the underdog wins not despite its limitations, but because of them. The Swordfish's origins trace back to 1930, when Fairey Aviation's chief designer, Marcel Lobel, was working on a reconnaissance aircraft for the Royal Navy. The company had built fighters and reconnaissance planes for years, but torpedo bombers remained the domain of Blackburn Aircraft, who held an unofficial monopoly on this crucial type. Torpedo bombers were the Fleet Air Arm's most important offensive weapon. While fighters provided protection and reconnaissance aircraft gathered intelligence, torpedo bombers were the aircraft that could actually sink enemy ships. This made them prestigious assignments, and Blackburn had cornered the market with successful designs like the Dart and Ripon. But the Great Depression was forcing military budgets to shrink. The Air Ministry began pressuring the Navy to consolidate aircraft types, combining multiple roles into single designs to reduce costs. This created an opportunity. If Fairey could design an aircraft that combined torpedo bombing with reconnaissance and light bombing capabilities, they might finally break into this lucrative market. Lobel began with the Fairey S-930, a reconnaissance aircraft featuring modern touches like a single-bay staggered wing configuration and steel tube construction covered in fabric. Then he adapted this design into what became known as the Greek machine, a private venture intended for sale to the Greek Navy, which wanted a multi-role aircraft. The prototype, designated TSR, Torpedo, Spotter, Reconnaissance, first flew on March 21, 1933. Initial tests went remarkably well. The aircraft demonstrated excellent handling characteristics and stability. Test pilot Chris Staniland reported that it was nearly impossible to put into a spin, which is usually a desirable characteristic. Then, on September 11, 1933, Staniland discovered why making an aircraft too stable can be dangerous. After finally managing to induce a spin during testing, the TSR entered a flat spin from which recovery proved impossible. The aircraft plummeted from 14,000 feet, with Staniland desperately trying every recovery technique. After 12 rotations with no response from the controls, he decided to bail out. What happened next became aviation legend. Stanley jumped from the pilot's cockpit, but the forces of the spin threw him back into the rear observer's position. He became one of the few pilots ever to bail out of the same aircraft twice in a single incident, once from the front cockpit, then again from the rear after the spin threw him back in. The prototype was destroyed, but Stanley survived with a remarkable story. For Fairey, this was disaster. The only prototype was gone, Blackburn's competing design was nearing completion, but Lobel and his team responded with remarkable speed. They redesigned the aircraft to address the spin problem, adding an extra fuselage bay, anti-spin strakes, and a larger tail. More impressively, they built and flew the TSR-2 in just 7 months, an almost impossible feat that required throwing normal production procedures out the window. The TSR-2 flew on April 17, 1934, and proved that the modifications had solved the spinning problem. The aircraft proceeded through evaluations where it competed against Blackburn's Shark and Gloucester's TSR-38. While none of the designs were particularly fast, all struggled to exceed 150 miles per hour. The Fairey design matched or exceeded its competitors in handling and versatility. The Air Ministry ordered 3 pre-production aircraft, then a batch of 86 production models. The type received the official name Swordfish, following the tradition of naming torpedo bombers after predatory fish. By 1936, the first production Swordfish were rolling off assembly lines, ready to equip Fleet Air Arm squadrons.
The production Swordfish Mark I was an aircraft that looked exactly like what it was, a design rooted in 1920s thinking, built with 1930s materials, entering service in an era when sleek monoplanes were becoming standard. The airframe used steel tube construction for strength, covered mostly in fabric treated with dope to tighten and weatherproof it. Only the forward fuselage around the cockpit featured metal skinning, offering some protection for the crew and engine. The wings were built with steel spars and aluminum ribs, also fabric covered. This construction method was simple, cheap, and easy to repair, crucial qualities for carrier-based aircraft operating far from major facilities. 3 crew members operated the Swordfish: pilot in front, observer bombardier in the middle position, and telegraphist air gunner in the rear. All sat in open cockpits exposed to wind, rain, and cold. Flying patrols over the North Atlantic meant crews returned half frozen, sometimes requiring physical assistance to climb out of their aircraft. The wings featured Handley Page leading-edge slots on the upper surface, innovative devices that improved low-speed handling by maintaining airflow over the wing at high angles of attack. This made the Swordfish remarkably forgiving during carrier landings, where pilots needed to fly slowly while maintaining control. The wings also folded for storage aboard carriers, reducing the wingspan from 45 feet 6 inches to just 17 feet 3 inches. Power came from a Bristol Pegasus radial engine producing 690 horsepower, adequate but not impressive. This drove a 3-blade metal propeller and gave the Swordfish a maximum speed of 139 miles per hour while carrying a torpedo. Cruising speed was around 90 miles per hour. By comparison, the German Bf-109 fighter could exceed 350 miles per hour, and even older fighters like the Hurricane could reach 340 miles per hour. The Swordfish's armament was straightforward: 1 forward-firing .303 Vickers machine gun for the pilot, and 1 rear-facing .303 Lewis gun on a flexible mount for the air gunner. These provided minimal defense against fighters. The real weapon was carried beneath the fuselage, an 18-inch torpedo weighing 1,610 pounds. Alternatively, the Swordfish could carry up to 1,500 pounds of bombs, depth charges, or mines. This payload capacity was actually impressive for an aircraft of this size. The Swordfish could deliver significant striking power, provided it survived long enough to reach its target. The challenge was that by 1939, surviving long enough was becoming increasingly difficult. The first squadron to receive the Swordfish was 825 Naval Air Squadron aboard HMS Glorious in July 1936. The transition from older types proceeded smoothly, and crews quickly appreciated the aircraft's handling characteristics. It was stable, predictable, and forgiving, qualities that made carrier operations safer. By September 1939, when war broke out, the Swordfish equipped most of the Fleet Air Arm's carrier-based torpedo bomber squadrons. The Navy had about 690 Swordfish in service, making it the most numerous torpedo bomber in the fleet. Unfortunately, production had not ramped up adequately before the war, creating immediate supply problems when losses began mounting. The Swordfish's first major operations involved anti-submarine patrols in the Atlantic. The concept seemed logical. Use carrier aircraft to hunt U-boats, with Swordfish spotting submarines and directing destroyers to attack. In practice, this strategy had fatal flaws. Carriers were large, visible targets, while U-boats were small and nearly impossible to spot in rough seas. On September 17, 1939, just 2 weeks into the war, HMS Courageous was torpedoed and sunk by U-29 while conducting anti-submarine operations. The carrier went down in 17 minutes, taking 519 men and 2 full squadrons of Swordfish with her. This disaster forced the Navy to reconsider using fleet carriers for submarine hunting, but it highlighted a disturbing reality. The fleet didn't have enough aircraft to sustain wartime losses. Production shortages became critical by late 1939. The last Swordfish order was scheduled to complete in November, with the new Fairey Albacore supposed to take over production. But Albacore production was delayed, creating a gap where the Navy needed 50 torpedo bombers per month, but was receiving only a handful. The Admiralty ordered continued Swordfish production alongside the Albacore and contracted Blackburn aircraft to build additional Swordfish, ensuring supply would meet demand. The Norwegian campaign in April 1940 provided the Swordfish with its first combat successes. On April 11th, Swordfish from HMS Furious scored the Fleet Air Arm's first torpedo hit of the war, damaging the German destroyer Z-21 Wilhelm Heidkamp. 2 days later, a Swordfish float plane from the battleship HMS Warspite spotted and sunk U-64 with anti-submarine bombs, the first U-boat killed by Fleet Air Arm aircraft. But Norway also revealed the Swordfish's vulnerability. During daylight bombing raids against German positions, Swordfish encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire and occasional fighter interception. Several were shot down, and survivors returned riddled with holes. The fabric covering that made the aircraft easy to build also meant bullets and shell fragments passed straight through, which could be beneficial when they missed vital components, but offered no protection when they didn't. By late 1940, the strategic situation in the Mediterranean had become critical. Italy's entry into the war gave the Axis control over naval bases that threatened British shipping routes. The Italian fleet, based primarily at Taranto, included 6 battleships and numerous cruisers and destroyers. This fleet in being posed a constant threat, tying down British forces and restricting operations. The concept of attacking Taranto with carrier-based torpedo bombers had been considered since the mid-1930s. After the fall of France, the operation became priority. The challenge was formidable. Taranto's harbor was protected by anti-aircraft batteries, barrage balloons, and anti-torpedo nets hanging from the ships. Attacking meant flying slow, vulnerable aircraft into one of the most heavily defended harbors in the Mediterranean. But reconnaissance revealed a weakness. The anti-torpedo nets were deep but didn't reach the harbor bottom. If torpedoes could be set to run at exactly the right depth, deep enough to pass under the nets, but shallow enough not to hit the harbor floor, they might penetrate the defenses. Fairey engineers modified the torpedo release mechanism so weapons would belly flop into the water rather than plunge deep, allowing precise depth control. The attack, codenamed Operation Judgment, launched on the night of November 11, 1940. HMS Illustrious would provide the aircraft. 21 Swordfish from 813, 815, 819, and 824 Naval Air Squadrons. Half would carry torpedoes, the rest would carry bombs and flares to create diversions and illuminate targets. The first wave of 12 Swordfish, led by Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Williamson, took off at 2100. They flew low over the water, approaching Taranto from the west. As they crossed the harbor mouth, Italian anti-aircraft guns opened fire, filling the sky with tracer rounds and shell bursts. The barrage was intense, but the Swordfish kept coming. The first torpedo struck the battleship Conte de Cavour, blasting a massive hole that caused her to settle in the shallow harbor. The battleship Littoria took 3 torpedo hits that left her partially submerged and out of action for months. Bomb-carrying Swordfish attacked cruisers and destroyers, adding to the chaos. Only 1 Swordfish was lost from the first wave. The second wave of 9 Swordfish, led by Lieutenant Commander J.W. Hale, arrived 90 minutes later. By now, the Italians were fully alert, and the anti-aircraft fire was even more intense. But the second wave pressed home their attack with equal determination. Another torpedo struck the battleship Caio Giulio, causing severe damage. 1 Swordfish was shot down, but the rest escaped. When dawn broke over Taranto, the results were undeniable. 3 Italian battleships were out of action, 2 sunk in shallow water, 1 heavily damaged. In a single night, 21 obsolete biplanes had accomplished what would have required an entire fleet of battleships in a conventional engagement. The attack cost 2 Swordfish and their crews, but it shifted the naval balance in the Mediterranean dramatically in Britain's favor. Taranto's impact extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. It demonstrated that aircraft carriers could strike decisively against enemy fleets in harbor, something previously considered too risky. The Japanese studied the attack carefully, incorporating its lessons into their planning for Pearl Harbor just over a year later. The age of the battleship was ending, and Taranto marked one of the defining moments in that transition.
In May 1941, the Swordfish played a crucial role in one of World War II's most famous naval chases. The German battleship Bismarck, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, broke out into the Atlantic to raid British convoy routes. On May 24th, Bismarck encountered the battlecruiser HMS Hood and the battleship HMS Prince of Wales in the Denmark Strait. In the resulting battle, Hood exploded and sank with the loss of all but 3 of her 1,418-man crew. The destruction of Hood, Britain's most famous warship, sent shockwaves through the Royal Navy. Every available ship was ordered to hunt down Bismarck. But the German battleship was fast, and the Atlantic was vast. After the initial engagement, Bismarck broke contact and disappeared into the open ocean. On May 24, 9 Swordfish from HMS Victorious located Bismarck using air-to-surface radar and launched the first aerial attack. Flying through terrible weather with visibility near zero, the Swordfish pressed home their attack. 1 torpedo struck Bismarck amidships, causing minor damage, but forcing the battleship to reduce speed and perform evasive maneuvers. More importantly, it confirmed Bismarck's position for pursuing British forces. But Bismarck's captain, Ernst Lindemann, managed to evade his pursuers during the night, and by May 25th, the British had lost contact. For over 30 hours, Bismarck steamed toward France and safety, while British forces searched desperately. If she reached French ports, she could be repaired and potentially threaten Atlantic convoys for months. On May 26th, a Catalina flying boat finally relocated Bismarck, about 700 miles from Brest. Force H, including the carrier HMS Ark Royal, was within striking distance. At 1450 hours, 15 Swordfish launched from Ark Royal to attack. Unfortunately, due to a communications error, they attacked the British cruiser HMS Sheffield instead. Fortunately, the magnetic detonators on their torpedoes malfunctioned and no hits were scored. The Swordfish returned to Ark Royal, rearmed with torpedoes using contact detonators, and launched again at 1910 hours. This time, they found the right target. Despite worsening weather and heavy anti-aircraft fire, the Swordfish pilots flew their attack runs at wave-top height. Several torpedoes hit Bismarck, but most struck the heavily armored belt and caused no significant damage. Then came the 1,000,000-to-1 shot. 1 torpedo struck Bismarck's stern, damaging the propellers and, catastrophically, jamming the rudder at 12 degrees to port.
The damage wasn't serious in terms of flooding or structural integrity, but it was absolutely critical for maneuverability. Bismarck could only steam in a wide circle, unable to maintain course toward France. The German crew tried everything to regain steering control. They rigged emergency steering from the engine rooms. They attempted to counteract the jammed rudder by varying propeller speed. Nothing worked. The rudder remained jammed and Bismarck could only sail in circles, while British battleships closed for the kill. On the morning of May 27th, HMS King George V and HMS Rodney engaged Bismarck with their main batteries. The German battleship, unable to maneuver effectively, was pounded into a burning wreck. She was finally sunk by torpedoes from the cruiser HMS Dorsetshire, going down with most of her crew. The Swordfish hadn't directly sunk Bismarck, but they delivered the wound that made her destruction inevitable. A fabric-covered biplane with a top speed barely exceeding 130 miles per hour had crippled a 50,000-ton battleship. It was the Swordfish's finest moment. Proof that in the right circumstances, obsolete technology could achieve what modern weapons couldn't. While Toronto and the Bismarck chase earned headlines, Swordfish squadrons were conducting less glamorous but equally important operations throughout the Mediterranean. Based in Malta, 830 Squadron became one of the war's most effective anti-shipping units, despite never operating more than 12 aircraft at a time. Malta's position in the central Mediterranean made it a strategic choke point. Axis supply convoys had to pass near the island when shipping supplies from Italy to North Africa. Swordfish from Malta hunted these convoys relentlessly, attacking under cover of darkness when Italian fighters couldn't intervene. The results were remarkable. In one record month, 830 squadrons sank over 98,000 tons of enemy shipping, roughly 100 times the squadron's own weight in aircraft. Each Swordfish that returned was immediately refueled, rearmed, and sent out again. The Axis logistics situation in North Africa became precarious, with supply ships regularly failing to reach their destinations. The Swordfish's slow speed actually became an advantage in these operations. Italian convoy escorts had gunnery systems designed to track fast-moving aircraft. When a Swordfish appeared, puttering along at 90 miles per hour, the systems couldn't adjust their lead calculations properly. Anti-aircraft fire often passed ahead of the slow-moving target, allowing the Swordfish to press attacks that faster aircraft might not survive. But when enemy fighters appeared, the situation changed dramatically. In December 1941, when Japanese forces attacked British positions in Asia, Swordfish based in Singapore and Ceylon encountered Japanese fighters and dive bombers. The results were catastrophic. The A-60 could fly twice as fast as a Swordfish and was vastly more maneuverable. In several engagements, every Swordfish was shot down without inflicting significant damage on the attackers. The worst disaster came in February 1942 during Operation Cerberus, the Channel Dash. German battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, along with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, attempted to run from Brest to Germany through the English Channel. 6 Swordfish from 825 Squadron, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, were ordered to attack despite terrible conditions and heavy German fighter protection. The Swordfish were intercepted by Bf-110 fighters before reaching their targets. The German fighters made short work of the slow, lumbering biplanes. All 6 Swordfish were shot down. Of 18 aircrew, only 5 survived. Esmond was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for leading the attack, despite knowing it was essentially suicidal. The Channel Dash marked the end of using Swordfish for daylight torpedo attacks against defended targets. By 1943, the Swordfish's role had completely evolved. It was no longer a frontline torpedo mission. That mission had passed to more modern aircraft like the Barracuda. Instead, the Swordfish found its final and most important role hunting U-boats from escort carriers in the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was reaching its critical phase. German U-boats were sinking hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping monthly, threatening Britain's survival. Escort carriers, small carriers converted from merchant ships, provided air cover for convoys. But they needed aircraft that could operate from their limited deck space and conduct long patrols in terrible weather. The Swordfish proved ideal. Its low landing speed and excellent low-speed handling made it safe to operate from small escort carrier decks. Its ability to fly slowly meant it could search methodically for submarines rather than racing past them. And its simple construction meant it could be maintained by small maintenance crews with limited resources. The Swordfish Mark II entered service with improved armament, 8 rocket projectiles mounted under the wings. These 3-inch rockets delivered explosive or armor-piercing warheads with devastating effect. Fired in pairs or full salvos, they gave the Swordfish offensive power comparable to a cruiser's broadside, provided the aircraft could get close enough. The Mark III added ASV, air-to-surface vessel radar, mounted between the landing gear. This radar could detect surfaced U-boats at ranges up to 12 miles, and sometimes even detect periscopes at shorter ranges. Combined with lee lights, powerful searchlights mounted under the wing, the radar-equipped Swordfish could hunt submarines in total darkness. The tactics evolved into hunter-killer groups. Radar-equipped Swordfish would search for submarines, while rocket-armed Swordfish orbited nearby. When radar detected a target, the search aircraft would guide attackers to the location, illuminate the submarine with searchlights, and the rocket-armed aircraft would strike. This proved terrifyingly effective against U-boat crews, who found themselves vulnerable even on the darkest nights. The Swordfish didn't sink vast numbers of U-boats. Official records credit it with destroying or assisting in the destruction of about 20 submarines. But its real value lay in deterrence. U-boat commanders knew that Swordfish patrols meant they couldn't surface safely to recharge their batteries or attack convoys.
The mere presence of Swordfish forced submarines to remain submerged, reducing their effectiveness dramatically. By 1945, 9 frontline squadrons still operated Swordfish, flying anti-submarine patrols over convoy routes and conducting anti-shipping operations off Norway. The final operational missions occurred in May 1945. The last squadron disbanded in June 1946, a full decade after the Swordfish entered service and 6 years after most people assumed it would be retired. Production ended in August 1944, after approximately 2,400 aircraft were built. Ironically, the Swordfish outlasted its intended replacement. The Fairey Albacore was retired in 1943, while Swordfish continued operating for another 3 years. The simple, outdated design that everyone expected to fail had proven more useful than the modern aircraft meant to replace it. The Swordfish's success defied conventional wisdom about military technology. It proved that raw performance specifications don't tell the whole story. Reliability mattered. Ease of maintenance mattered. The ability to operate from limited facilities mattered. And perhaps most importantly, having the right capabilities for the actual missions being flown mattered more than having impressive capabilities that looked good on paper. Today, one airworthy Swordfish still flies in Britain, maintained by Navy wings. It serves as a flying memorial to the crews who flew this improbable aircraft through storms, darkness, and enemy fire. The Swordfish may have been obsolete from the day it entered service, but obsolete doesn't mean ineffective. Sometimes the underdog wins simply by refusing to quit.